Praise be to God. Today let us meditate the second half of Psalm 13. Let us recapture what we have meditated in our previous devotion. We saw the increase of David's troubles due to King Saul. David felt abandoned by God, and David felt humiliated because of his enemies. Let us read Psalm 13 verses 3 and 4. Look on me and answer, O my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemies will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. In the first two verses, David could not control his emotions and he cried out. Whereas in verse 3, he turned to a rational, thoughtful, and a deliberate prayer. From verse 3, we understand David was overwhelmed because of his emotions. David was emotionally drained, and also he feared for his life. But David nailed his emotions to a glorious truth that God has the power to save him. David also found it difficult to take his next step because any wrong step will cost his life. Therefore, David requests God to help him choose the correct path. David's enemies were waiting for a chance to overpower and destroy him. Even the news of a fall would bring joy to his enemies, who are huge in number. Though David was worried that the enemies might say, we have prevailed against him, but God was teaching him to be utterly under his will. Though David's current situation might be lossy, but being utterly under God's will surely lead to his crowning. There is a lesson for us from this today. We can afford to give up few things in life if we are going for a crown. We cannot have everything we want. We should give up a few liberties, such as watching hours of TV or going to places of amusements, particularly when we don't have time to meditate God's words, ponder and pray. We expect our pastors, evangelists and missionaries to live by faith. Why should they when we don't? We should give up a few loyalties. The devil is very clever. He will give many good things, good activities and good commitments to see that these things take all our time. Our time first and foremost belong to Lord Jesus Christ. Secondly to our family, followed by church and our work. A greater part of loyalty should shift to doing God's work. God's work for the extension of His kingdom. When we are under God's will, the moves we take might look like losses, but would finally become eternal and glorious gains. Let me read the next verses, Psalm 13 verses 5 and 6. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for He has been good to me. David has moved to the final stage of his soul's experience in the time of trial and testing. David has come through tears to truth, and through truth to triumph. Many people have wondered how David could swing so quickly from gloom to gladness. The secret is found in verse 3, that David's eyes were fixed on God. In verse 5, David says he can sing because of God's salvation. Is this salvation from sin or salvation from Satan? Yes, it's included, but the salvation meant in verse 5 is the salvation from King Saul. Suddenly now David feels he is on the winning side. This salvation is salvation from our difficult and tough times. In verse 6, David says, I will sing to the Lord because He has been good to me. David's actual and immediate circumstances have not changed. King Saul has not called off his executioners, or King Saul is not dead, or David did not receive any shipment of arms. Nothing has changed. David writes verse 6 in past tense because he is so sure of the change in situation, as though it has already happened. Finally, it did happen, and David was crowned as king because David was utterly under God's will. Today, many people confuse us by saying God's will. Some people say it's God's will, you should do that. And few others contradict by saying it's not God's will, you should not do that. When we ask someone to pray, they pray and say it's not God's will. I am not saying you should not take advice. I am just saying we should all make decisions under the presence of God. We have to be under His will. If we are under His will, we will have the inner peace. And if we are under God's will, surely we will be crowned. Thank you. Praise be to God.